Hey, Holy Readers, welcome to week 44 of 2025 here at Holy Holy. Now, below it might say episode 96. That's because we filmed Holy Holy last year in 2024 as well. So this is our 96th episode of Holy Holy, but it's week 44 of this year, 2025. And I think that when we count it down that way, we can kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel, right? Because we know there are going to be 52 episodes. So we're counting down. We're at 44 of 52, and that's really exciting. Continue to read, press on, finish strong, because God is still speaking this year. This week, we're going to recap the reading from October the 27th to November the 2nd. This includes Job 18 through 24, Psalm 114 and 121, Acts 27 and 28. So we finished that book. And then we begin the Gospel of Mark with chapters 1 through 12. So as we jump back into Job, remember that there are 3 dialogue cycles, and now we have begun the second one. So the first dialogue cycle is Job 4 through 14. The second one is Job 18 through 24. And these dialogue cycles are where his friends speak and then Job responds. It's Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. And what they're trying to do is figure out why Job is suffering, because they have retribution theology, which means they believe that the wicked sin and they suffer. The righteous don't sin, and so they don't suffer. And so if you are suffering, that means that you are a sinner. And they're coming at Job with this idea. It's very, very simple. I want to encourage you, though, not to oversimplify things, because we are complex beings. And that's why God is complex, so multifaceted. There's nothing that is too complicated for God. But when we oversimplify different situations, sometimes we can be more hurtful than helpful. And I think that we find that here with Job's friends. And here in the second dialogue cycle, they're going from implying that Job has sinned to all out accusing Job of sinning. They are doubling down. They know for sure Job is sinning. That's why he's suffering. If he'll repent, then the suffering will end. And Job comes back and he doubles down and he says, guys, I haven't sinned. I haven't sinned. I don't know why I'm suffering. And this is so important, is that he trusts God even though God is silent. And I want to tell you that today, you may be in a very dark situation and you can't quite see the ending yet. You don't know how God is going to work it out. And I would just tell you, trust God anyway. Trust God in the face of opposition. Trust God when you don't understand. Trust God when he's silent, because Romans 8:28 promises us that he will work all things together for the good of those that love him and are called according to his purpose. It's not that God is working it's not that all the things are working, but God is presiding over the puzzle pieces of our life, and God will work all the things if we will give them to him. So, in this time, Job says something so wonderful in chapter 19, verse 25. He says, I know my Redeemer lives. And this reminds me of that beautiful song that Nicole C. Mullen sang. I know my Redeemer lives. You know that one? And I want to tell you today that Jesus, he died and he was buried and he resurrected and he ascended. That Jesus lives today to take away our sin, to take away our shame and our punishment. And he does that for you today if you'll surrender all to him. Trust God even when you don't understand, and God will show up in the midst of your suffering. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Psalm 23. God is with you today. Hold to God's unchanging hand. So as we move then to Mark, I want to tell you quick, right before we end Job, that have you ever heard by the skin of my teeth? That idiom there, by the skin of my teeth, means like barely made it. That comes from Job in the King James Version. And the reason why we have that idiom today in English is because that is the way the King James translators translated that line of Hebrew poetry there. So I just think that that's fun to know. as we go to the Gospel of Mark, remember that Mark was not one of the 12 disciples. Now, Matthew was one of those, and so was John, but Luke was not, and Mark was not. So then how did Mark come to know all of these stories? Well, we see in Acts chapter 12 for sure, verse 12, he's known as John Mark, and he travels with Peter. So as he's traveling with Peter during Peter's ministry, he hears all of these wonderful stories about his time with Jesus, and he records them. Papias is one of our early church fathers in 110 AD, and he records that Mark traveled with Peter and did indeed write this gospel. So when you start thinking about the timeline, think with me for a minute. 1 AD is when Jesus would have been born, because we don't have a 0 AD, right? And so then if Jesus died at 33, that would put it at 34 AD. And Mark likely wrote about 60 AD, between 65 and 70 AD. So that is not far removed from the resurrection and ascension of Jesus Christ. And that should give you a lot of peace and a lot of confidence in Mark's work. This is the earliest gospel that we have. It's the first one written of the four gospels. And so it's not that people hundreds and hundreds of years later heard this mythology or heard this great story of a possible historical figure. No, these are eyewitnesses. Luke said this. These are eyewitness accounts. And people did their research. They did their homework, and they're writing within just a few decades of Jesus Christ. So these manuscripts are reliable. Now, Nero was a horrible Roman emperor. He burned Rome. He blamed it on the Christians, and then he persecuted them. This is what's known as the Neronian persecution. At the end of Acts, when Paul appeals to the emperor, he's appealing to Nero, and Nero is said to have martyred Peter and Paul. So Mark is likely writing right after the Neronian persecution. And he's writing to Gentile believers because he translates Aramaic terms. He explains Jewish customs, and you wouldn't have to do that to a Jewish audience. So he's probably writing to Gentiles and most likely Romans. Now, here's the structure. The prologue is chapter 1, verses 1 through 13. Jesus' Galilean ministry of miracles, parables, and growing opposition is chapter 1, verse 14 through 8:26. Jesus' journey to Jerusalem is 8:27 to 10:52. Then you've got the Passion Week in 11:1 to 15:47. And then you've got the resurrection in 16:1 through 8. So here are a few things that are cool about Mark. Since Mark is the earliest gospel, it is believed that Matthew and Luke had access to Mark's gospel and used it as a source for their writings. So 90% of the book of Mark appears in Matthew, and 50%, actually a little over 50% of Mark appears in Luke. But I don't want you to think that Mark was just a good rough draft. No. This is the earliest snapshot that we have of Jesus's ministry. It's very, very important. Now, when you read the book of Mark, he goes quickly. If you read it all in one sitting, you'll find your heart beating fast because he says immediately, immediately, immediately. In Greek, that word is euthus, and Mark uses it over 40 times, and it's to show the immediacy of Jesus's ministry and coming kingdom. One thing that's interesting too about Mark is something called the messianic secret. Oftentimes when Jesus heals people, he will tell them not to tell who he is or what he's done. And this is because Jesus's identity is not revealed in political power, but it's revealed in suffering, and eventually the ultimate suffering that Jesus endures on the cross. Now, Mark ends abruptly. If you read here, I've got it open all the way to verse 8. 1 through 8 of chapter 16 is the shorter ending. And this is where the women see the empty tomb and then they leave, but there's no real ending. Mark starts the gospel with in the beginning, right? This is the beginning of the gospel. But he doesn't give a formal ending if you end it at verse 8. So in our earliest manuscripts, we don't find the remaining verses in Mark, the longer ending, if you will. But I want to tell you that this should not diminish the last verses of Mark at all, because they are important. Here's what you read, verse 17, and these signs will accompany those who believe. By using my name, they will cast out demons. They will speak in new tongues. They will pick up snakes in their hand. And if they drink any deadly thing, it will not hurt them. They will lay their hands on the sick and they will recover. We see a great commission. We see the ascension of Jesus. This is good theology and it's good doctrine, and it should not be discarded. So I want you to know that. Now, at the end of Mark, we see that we are the ones to continue the gospel. We are commissioned to go and take the gospel to the ends of the earth. And I want to tell you today, share the gospel with someone this week, friend. Share your testimony, what the Lord has done for you. Continue to spread the good news, and I will see you back here on Monday. Don't forget to email me at jasmine@regenerationnashville.org. Find us on YouTube and Facebook, Apple, Spotify, all the places that you get your podcast, iHeartRadio, and I'll see you again soon. God bless.